My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm 80 years old. I told the truth too late. It sounds simple when I say it like that. Clean, almost harmless. It wasn't. I've been sitting in this chair most of the afternoon, looking at the hallway that leads to our bedroom. The door is open. Her side of the closet is still half full. I haven't touched it in 3 years. I don't know who I'm speaking to exactly. Maybe no one. Maybe just the quiet. When you get to my age, silence starts to feel like a room you live inside. I wasn't an unkind man. That's important to say. I worked as a high school history teacher for 37 years. I believed in fairness, in discipline, in telling young people that truth mattered. I said it often. Truth matters. I just didn't understand what it would cost to hold one back. Her name was Evelyn. We met in 1965. She was 21, studying nursing. I was 23, and already certain of the kind of man I would become. Steady, responsible, predictable. She used to laugh with her whole body, head tilted back, hand on her chest like she needed to hold herself together. I loved that about her. We married quickly. A small ceremony in her parents' church. I can still see the yellowed photographs, her dress too long at the hem, my suit slightly oversized at the shoulders. We looked younger than we felt. The first years were good. Small apartment, second-hand furniture, nights spent talking about things that felt urgent, then money, careers, whether we wanted children. We did, or at least we thought we did. The first lie I told wasn't dramatic. It didn't involve another woman. It didn't involve crime. It was quieter than that. Evelyn wanted to move to Chicago in 1972. She had been offered a position at a larger hospital, better pay, more responsibility. She was proud, though she tried not to show it too much. I had just been offered a permanent teaching contract in our town. I didn't want to leave, but instead of saying I was afraid of starting over, afraid of not being the respected one in the room, I told her it wouldn't be practical, that the cost of living was too high, that we should think about stability. She listened. She folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. "I understand," she said. That night, she stood at the kitchen sink longer than usual. I remember the sound of running water. Years later, I would realize that wasn't the truth. It was my preference, disguised as reason. But I let it stand. We stayed. She found another nursing position in town. Smaller, slower. She never complained, not once. In 1978, she miscarried. We had been trying for almost 3 years. Quietly. Not telling anyone until we were sure. I was at school when she called. Her voice was calm, too calm. By the time I got to the hospital, it was over. I remember sitting beside her bed, holding her hand. I told her it wasn't anyone's fault, that these things happen. She turned her face toward the window. I wanted to tell her I was relieved. There. That's the truth I didn't say. I was relieved, because I was beginning to suspect I didn't want children the way she did. I loved the idea of them, the image of it. But the reality frightened me. The responsibility, the loss of quiet. I didn't say that. Instead, I let her grieve alone in a room we both occupied. After that, we stopped trying. It wasn't a discussion, it just faded. She poured herself into work. Longer shifts, additional certifications. I stayed steady at the school. Football games on Fridays, parent-teacher meetings, predictable routines. From the outside, we looked solid. Inside, something had shifted. There was a dinner in 1984 I still see clearly. We were at a friend's house. 4 couples. Wine glasses clinking. Children running down the hallway. Someone asked us when we planned to finally have kids. I laughed. I said we liked our freedom. Evelyn smiled politely. On the drive home, she stared out the passenger window. I could have told her then. I could have said that I had never been honest about my fear, that I had allowed her body to carry hope I didn't fully share. Instead, I turned on the radio. There are moments that open like doors. You can walk through them, or you can stand still. I stood still. In the 1990s, her mother became ill. Cancer. Evelyn spent months traveling back and forth to care for her. I stayed home more often than I should have. School responsibilities, committees, excuses that sounded reasonable. One night, after her mother had passed, she asked me quietly in our kitchen, "Did you ever want this life?" I knew what she meant. Not the house, not the jobs. This life, the shape of it, the childless silence, the small-town boundaries. I said yes. I didn't hesitate. That was the second truth I buried. I said yes, because it was easier than unraveling everything we had built, easier than admitting that I had shaped our life around my comfort and called it compromise. She nodded. That nod again, the same one from 1972. Time moved the way it always does, without asking permission. We grew older, slower, softer around the edges. In 2015, she retired. The house became quieter than either of us expected. One afternoon she brought out a cardboard box from the closet. Inside were old letters, acceptance letters from nursing programs that Chicago offer, pamphlets from adoption agencies we had once requested but never followed through on. She placed them on the table between us. "I used to imagine another version of us," she said. I felt something tighten in my chest. I asked her what she meant. She looked at me for a long time. "A version where we were braver," she said. I didn't answer, because bravery would have required me to finally speak the full truth that I had been afraid for most of my life. Afraid of change. Afraid of inadequacy. Afraid that if I let her become everything she could be, I would shrink beside her. Instead, I had convinced both of us that stillness was stability. 2 years later, she was diagnosed with heart failure. It progressed quickly. Hospital rooms again. Machines. Soft beeping sounds that fill the night. One evening, when the nurses had stepped out, she reached for my hand. "Was I enough?" she asked. I thought she meant as a wife. I said, "More than enough." She closed her eyes. I didn't understand until later. She wasn't asking if she had been enough for me. She was asking if the life she lived had been enough. And I had answered the wrong question. She died in early spring. The house has held its breath ever since. It was only after the funeral, sitting alone at this same kitchen table, that I let the words come. Out loud. I was afraid. The room didn't respond. But something inside me shifted too late to matter. I told the truth, just not when she could hear it. After she was gone, people said the usual things. She knew you loved her. You gave her a good life. You were devoted. I nodded the way she used to. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes from being misunderstood in your favor, when everyone believes you were better than you were. I began waking up at 4 a.m. The house feels different in the dark, smaller, every sound sharper. I would sit at the kitchen table and think about Chicago, about that letter. I imagined her walking hospital corridors in a larger city, leading teams, making decisions that carried weight, coming home tired but fulfilled in a way I never allowed. I had told myself that love meant keeping us safe, but safety is a narrow room. I found her journals in the bottom drawer of her nightstand. She had written more than I knew. Not angry entries, not accusations, just small observations. Daniel seems content. I wonder what might have happened if we'd left. I don't want to resent him. That last one stayed with me. I don't know if she ever did. Resent me. She never said the word. But I began to see the spaces where it might have lived. The longer shifts. The way she lingered at the hospital even after retirement, volunteering. The quiet acceptance when friends talked about grandchildren. She carried disappointment with grace. I carried fear with authority. There's a difference. The truth I finally told was not dramatic. I didn't confess to an affair or a secret child. I confessed to smallness, to choosing comfort over courage, to mistaking silence for peace. A week before I was admitted to the hospital last winter pneumonia. Nothing poetic, I visited her grave. The ground was hard, the air cold. I stood there longer than I expected, and I said it again. I was afraid. I told her I had been afraid of Chicago, afraid of fatherhood, afraid of not being the center of our shared decisions. I told her I had loved her laughter because it filled the spaces I didn't know how to fill myself. I told her I had answered yes when the real answer was more complicated. The wind moved through the trees. I don't know if that means anything, but it felt like speaking into something larger than my own regret. At 80, the body begins its slow negotiations. The doctor talks about managing conditions, monitoring levels. There's a calmness in knowing the road is shorter now. What unsettles me isn't dying. It's knowing that the clearest sentence of my life arrived after the only person who needed to hear it was gone. If I close my eyes, I can still see her at 21, laughing. Certain the world was wider than this town, I helped narrow it, not out of cruelty, out of fear I never named. If you're listening to this, I'm not asking you to fix anything. I don't have instructions to offer. I'm just telling you what happened. I told the truth. Too late for it to change the shape of our life. Sometimes I sit in the hallway and look at the open closet door. Her dresses still hang there. I imagine her standing in the doorway, waiting for me to say what I should have said decades ago, and in that quiet, I say it again. Not loudly, just enough for the empty room to hear. If you've stayed with me this long, maybe sit with your own quiet for a moment. You don't have to respond. Just listen to what hasn't been said yet. There's something else I haven't said. It didn't begin in 1972. It began earlier. The first time I remember choosing silence over honesty was the night before our wedding. We were sitting in her parents' living room. The house smelled like furniture polish and lilies from the rehearsal dinner. She was nervous, not about marrying me, about whether she would be enough. She said, "Promise me we'll build something bigger than this town." I remember smiling. I remember touching her hand. I didn't promise. I said, "We'll see what makes sense." That was the pattern. Even then, she was always leaning toward expansion. I was always measuring risk. When she studied late into the night during nursing school, textbooks spread across the bed, she looked alive in a way I didn't fully understand. Driven, curious. I mistook that energy as temporary. I assumed it would soften into something quieter once we settled down. It didn't. It just redirected. After the miscarriage, there was a week where she barely spoke. One evening, I found her sitting on the bathroom floor, the lights off, just the hallway lights spilling in. She said, "I thought my body knew what to do." I sat beside her, but I kept my hands folded. I could have told her then that I had never been fully certain about becoming a father. I could have told her that part of my grief was confusion, not loss. But I stayed silent because I believed silence would protect her. What it protected was me. Years later, I started noticing the way she watched other families. At school events, she would stand slightly apart, observing parents juggle coats and homework and loud children. She never reached for my hand in those moments. Not angrily, just quietly. In 1998, we took a trip to Chicago. It was a conference for me. Education reform, budget discussions, nothing memorable. She came along. We walked past a large hospital one afternoon. She slowed down. I asked if she was tired. She said no. We stood there longer than necessary. Doctors and nurses moved quickly in and out of the entrance. The building was tall, busy, alive. She said, almost to herself, "I wonder." I knew what she meant, and I still said nothing. Back at the hotel, she stood by the window, looking out over the city lights. I told her it was noisy, that I preferred our quiet town. She didn't argue. She just nodded. I've come to understand that nod wasn't agreement. It was resignation. There's a difference. In our 50s, when most couples were planning retirement adventures or celebrating grandchildren, we developed routines instead. Sunday mornings at the same diner, same booth. Thursday evenings watching whatever television series happened to be on. It wasn't unhappy. That's the part that confuses people when I try to explain it. We weren't miserable. We were contained. The truth I delayed wasn't explosive. It was subtle. It would have required me to say, "I shaped this life," around my fear, and then to ask her what she truly wanted. I was afraid that if I opened that door, she might walk through it without me, so I kept it closed. The night she asked, "Was I enough?" wasn't the only question she posed in that hospital room. Earlier that week she had said, "Do you ever think about the roads we didn't take?" I laughed softly. I said, "Everyone does." She looked disappointed in a way I had never seen before. Not dramatic, just tired. I realize now she wasn't asking philosophically. She was asking specifically about Chicago, about children, about the version of herself she set aside. I answered like a teacher, general, safe, not like a husband. After her funeral, I sat alone in the bedroom and opened the closet. I pressed my face into one of her sweaters. It still smelled faintly like her soap. I said the words clearly that night. "I was afraid you would outgrow me." It felt ridiculous and devastating at the same time. She never gave me reason to believe she would leave. That was my insecurity speaking, and I built our life around it. There is a cost to delayed honesty. It doesn't explode. It settles like dust, layer by layer, until everything is slightly muted. Our house was full of muted colors by the end. Not sad, just softened. If I could describe Evelyn in one word, it wouldn't be patient. It would be expansive. She had an appetite for possibility. I mistook that appetite as threat instead of gift, and I told myself I was protecting us. At 80, I don't have the luxury of pretending I didn't know better. I knew. I just didn't want the discomfort of saying it aloud. There's a photograph on my dresser. She's standing in our backyard in 1982, wind pushing her hair across her face, laughing at something I can't remember. When I look at it now, I see someone waiting for something unnamed. Maybe she was waiting for me to catch up. I never quite did. If you're still listening, I'm not trying to rewrite our story. It was real. There was tenderness. There was loyalty. There were ordinary days that felt safe and warm. But underneath it all, there was a sentence I avoided. And when I finally spoke it, the room was empty. That's what I mean when I say I told the truth too late. Not that it would have fixed everything, but it would have been shared, and shared truths weigh less than solitary ones. I sit here now, 80 years old, listening to the house breathe. I say her name sometimes, just to hear it move through the air. Evain, it still feels like something that belongs in this space. If you've been quiet with me through this, I appreciate it. You don't have to take anything from it. Just maybe sit with the sentences you've been postponing. Sometimes they're smaller than we think, and sometimes they're the only thing that really mattered. Thank you for listening my story. If you want to share your story, please comment below. Take care. Goodbye.